Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Lea, brilliant to have you here. And to start with, please introduce yourself and tell people about the great work that you do.
Well, thank you for that, Alan. I'm Lea Katsanis, and I'm a professor at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. My area of specialty is pharmaceutical marketing, but I also concentrate on generally branding, pharmaceutical advertising. So that's pretty much been my life for the majority of my adult life. And Alan and I had the pleasure of working together on an article that we published on combining his love of values with my love for pharma. So it was, and we had also the lovely coincidence of meeting on LinkedIn, which I have, I've never been a social media person, but I was very happy to have had that experience. So
Yeah, it was. I was just thinking of that as you started to talk because, you wrote that values paper. So I can't. When was that? Do you remember?
it was published just last year. And
No,
it
no,
was
no,
quite.
not the one we wrote together. The reason that we
Oh,
actually
yes,
connected in the
yes,
first place.
the editorial. Yes, I had written an editorial for one of the pharmaceutical industry publications on the need for what I called a chief values officer.
That's it.
And Alan reached out to me after he read that, and he said, we should collaborate on something. And so we did. It took us a little while, but we finally got together and collaborated on something with my other, my former student who is in the pharmaceutical industry as well. And he contributed quite a bit. So between the three of us, it ended up being a really lovely paper. Very proud of it.
Yeah, it's one of those beautiful stories about just putting two dots together and see what happens, and something did happen that was pretty special actually. So
Great.
let's choose a values jam card from the deck. So I'm just gonna turn them out. There's 60 cards in here, and I'm just gonna give them a shuffle. And how many piles shall I make in front of me, Leah?
Oh, make three piles. Why not?
Three.
Three piles.
Okay. So I've made them different sizes. And so would you like the pile on my left, on my right, or in the middle?
Oh, let's do the middle.
Okay. So we've got quite a few here. So we got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 25 cards. So a number between 1 and 25.
Five.
Number 5.
My son's birthday.
Well, what do you think of that?
Oh, that's a very nice card.
I'm glad you're pleased with it. And the first question is this: what does forgiveness mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Hmm, that's a complicated question. Lots of questions in the question. So let's start with, what does forgiveness mean?
Yeah.
Um, it means, I guess, the giving grace to other people who've wronged you in some way. Being able to say, I don't like what you did, but maybe I understand why you did it, and I'll be willing to give you grace and overlook that now. So I don't think it necessarily means you forget what happened, but I think it means that you are willing to forgive the person. It might be the first time the person did something to you, or it might have been an inadvertent thing that happened. So it might not be purposeful. It might not be something that was done on purpose. Um, and I suspect in most most, and I'm speaking of close relationships now, I think normally when people who are close to you do something that needs forgiveness, it's not something that they do on purpose. In my mind anyway, at least in my personal experience, I've not experienced, very few times have I experienced someone doing something purposefully in a malicious way. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but to me it would, that's not been my personal experience for the most part.
Yeah, and as I asked the question, I was starting to think about how forgiveness is kind of rising above yourself. So playing to what you said about grace. So it's about consciously having this broader perspective rather than it all being about you, in order to understand what's actually happened.
Mhm.
Um, and then, yeah, interesting what you were saying there about how it's not intentional a lot of the time. I think that's so true in my experience as well. Although that doesn't mean to say that it's 100% that way.
No, exactly. Exactly. I don't think so either. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the metaphor part of that question? So when you think about forgiveness, what images come to mind? What sounds come to mind? And what feelings come to mind?
Um, I think the feelings are mixed because I think forgiving another person can make you feel better. Um, it's a way of sort of cauterizing the wound, I guess, in a way. It puts it to bed for you where you sort of say, well, I'm moving past it. I won't forget it, but I choose not to think about it at this point. I'm going to move ahead. I think the feelings are mixed. I think you feel relief. I think you feel sometimes you feel better, particularly if it's a person who you're close to that does something inadvertently to you. I think it relieves a certain amount of the pain that goes with whatever that wound was that was inflicted. Sounds, I'll be honest with you, I can't think of any, honestly. Maybe a sigh of relief. I don't know. That's pretty much where I'm there. I don't really associate words like that with sounds.
Yeah,
Feeling, but not sounds.
yeah. So for me, sounds are not far away from your sigh of relief, actually, because for me, forgiveness is it's a silence which is kind of okay, but maybe slightly uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I agree with that actually. Yeah, you can forgive, but it takes a little while. It doesn't, it's not an immediate comfort. It's you're sort of uncomfortable for a while. I get that. Yeah.
and what about I don't know why I've just thought of this, but extreme situations and forgiveness. So, you read in the press about, I don't know, let's say somebody who was drink driving, killing a child, and the parent saying, "I've forgiven them."
Yeah.
I can't understand it, I have to say.
I think I don't know that I would have the grace to do that myself.
Right.
However, what I would say is I think there are people who that is their way of coping with it. I think that their way of managing the extraordinary pain that will never go away is to say, if I don't forgive that person, then that person's already, the act is done. So there's no way of correcting it. There's no fixing that. So which part can I fix? Can I, the only part I have control over is myself. So if I don't do the act of forgiveness, then I will suffer. And I'm already suffering. So that sense of and I suspect that that takes a certain amount of faith. Uh, I think that those people who have very deep faith believe in that concept of forgiveness in that way. That forgiveness is for you. Like you're not really doing it for the other person. In some ways, it can be seen as selfish because you can
Yeah.
do the forgiving to make yourself feel better. It takes the burden off of you, and you say, well, I forgave this person. What they did, they have to live with, but I don't have to live with those feelings myself. So I think it's quite a complicated thing. As I
Yeah,
say, I don't know that I would have the grace to do that. I'm not sure. I hope I never have to find myself in a place like that where I would have to deal with that kind of feeling. But I understand why they do it, and I very much understand why they do it.
mm. And yeah, so to a certain extent, this is a pointless conversation from my side because, like you, I've not experienced it. So I'm not speaking from,
Right.
historical experience or anything like that. But I have a feeling that I tend to be pretty good with acceptance. So if something happens and I don't like it, I kind of like, well, it's happened. You can't, if you moan about it and whinge about it, you're just wasting energy. So just decide what you're
Right.
going to do and get on with it. In an extreme case, I hope I'd be able to cope in some way in that way. But like you, I'm not so sure I would be able to go very well into that next step of forgiveness. So I would be in that example that I gave. I think I would be, well, these things happen. Um, for whatever reason you were in that situation and you caused this, it's happened. But I don't know about forgiveness.
Yeah, it's very tough. I don't know that everything can be forgiven. Um, so, but as I say, other people have a certain faith about things that I think brings them to that place. So, and probably that works for them.
Yeah. So what about so let's get very practical now, and we've both talked about examples where in the extreme we're saying, well, we haven't experienced that, but where have you experienced forgiveness?
Forgiveness? Oh, geez. Let me think about that for a minute. Well, sometimes certainly at work. I think sometimes your colleagues will do things that, uh, particularly when I can say certainly when I was the chair of my department, sometimes your colleagues will do things that they don't realize are hurtful. And so you kind of say, well, they'll be angry at you for something that may have had nothing to do with your own actions, just stuff that happens. So, it's you understand they're upset, you understand their anger, and you put it aside. And you just say, well, that's just another day at work. Everything you do can't be, and sometimes you do something yourself. I certainly have, where again, inadvertently, I may have done something unintentionally, and somebody will say, well, you did this and you did that. And I'll say, yeah, you're right, I did. And then I'll say, I'm sorry. And they'll say, oh, okay. So as long as as long as I apologize for the most part, um, that's okay. So I
Yeah,
think that's mostly I see it at work. At home, I think, oh my gosh, if you're married, if you have children or a partner, if you have friends, you're always going to be in a position to forgive somebody at some point in time, and they will be in a position to forgive you, right? Because none of us are perfect beings, and we all do things without necessarily thinking about it. I mean, I think if you're married or with a partner and you don't get on each other's nerves or do things every once in a while that annoy each other, you probably aren't communicating very well. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say about that exactly, but from a practical perspective, I think in every single day you find yourself from the smallest thing to somebody cutting you off on the road while you're driving, to a sales clerk who may have been rude to you, or you may have been rude to a sales clerk, or you may have cut someone off that you shouldn't have. So I think we all find ourselves both in situations where we are either the forgiver or the forgivee, if you will.
yeah, I think that's right. But there's two things that you've made me think of. One was from a little bit earlier when you mentioned how complex forgiveness is, and then when you were talking about how people maybe cause offense or a problem or whatever it is unintentionally, and then in my experience, there is commonplace where somebody has done something unintentionally, then somebody explains what the effect was, but because it was unintentional by them, they kind of find it difficult to understand why
Right.
it's had such a bad impact. And they might say, oh, sorry about that. But you kind of feel, well, you don't really mean that. because you're
Yeah,
not thinking about the effect. You're thinking about the fact that it wasn't intentional, right?
exactly. And I think that's probably the biggest thing about when you talk about forgiveness. I genuinely think that most people in interpersonal relationships, I mean, where you are at work or at home, let's say, I think 99.9% of those are inadvertent. And sometimes it's just a matter that someone will be tired. Something may have happened that day that your partner or your husband or wife were not aware of. Um, Something got on your nerves and you're carrying it over with you to either the office or home. And so sometimes you may do things and you say, oh, I really didn't mean to do that. But of course, you weren't thinking about other people. You were in your own space, in your thinking about yourself. So, and I think probably that's one of the ways you can avoid having to be forgiven is not to always be thinking about yourself.
Dead right, dead
You
right.
know, it's
And the other complicator as well, Leah, is that the world is more than just the interaction between the two people, right? So it might be that I do something, other things happen, not necessarily connected to what I've done, but as a result of that connection, you are on the receiving end of it. And because of my action, you feel bad. And it's not all about what I did, but I've been heavily involved. So I think what you said earlier about it being complex is spot on. My example of forgiveness is a personal, well, oh, actually, it's personal and work because it was a work colleague. I was living in hotel accommodation for a job, and I came home quite late after work one night, and I noticed that the light was on in this guy's room. So I just gave him a knock, and he opened the door, holding a half-empty bottle of whiskey, obviously in a bit of a state. And he explained to me that his girlfriend had been killed in a road accident.
oh my Lord.
So I stayed up with him all night, talking and trying to comfort him. And then soon after, I found that it wasn't true and he had been making it up. Um, but that equally, he wasn't a very well man. And so when when I found out what he had done initially, I was raging. It was like, how can you do this to somebody? But then, not too long after that, I found out that he wasn't very well, and so the forgiveness bit was for him because it wasn't really him; it was whatever's going on for him that caused it. Um, yeah, but I sometimes wonder if I hadn't found out the cause of what he did, how I would have held that, because it
Yeah.
felt really, really bad.
Yeah, because it does feel bad. I mean, that's terrible to be deceived in such a way, particularly about something. Well, there's actually, it's kind of a funny story. When I was doing my PhD, there was a most wonderful man who was the dean of students. And I had to go and see him about a particular student. And he started telling me this story about a student he'd seen recently. So the student came to see him and said, oh, my brother died in a motorcycle accident. And so I haven't been going to class, and that's why my grades are so bad. So you had to know this gentleman. He was the most special individual. And so he said, well, after the student left his office, he said, I'm going to call the mother and I'm going to express my condolences because that's just the kind of person he was. So he calls the mother and he says, I'm so sorry to hear about the death of your son. And there's dead silence on the phone. And she's hysterical. And she says, what do you mean? She said, which one of my sons? And so it then came out that, in fact, it was an excuse to get out of the work. And so before she hung up the phone, she said, I am going to kill that SOB when I get my hands on him. And so that's kind of, now I don't know what the outcome of that was exactly, but my son used to tell me, Mom, he says, I don't lie to you anymore. He says, because I kind of know you're going to find everything out anyway. And that was sort of the sort of gist of that story. It's like, uh, I mean, I don't even know what the conversation was like between that kid and his mother. I would love to have been a fly on the wall because I know what my reaction would have been. But
Well, do you know, you've just done something to me that happens very frequently in Values Jam. So often people say, "Hey, you've just reminded me of something that happened 10 or 20 years ago. Just reminded me of this." So I was about to leave one job and take up another job.
mm-hmm.
And the job that I was going to, one of the non-exec directors was a close member of the royal family. And I received a letter from this person saying, shows how long ago it was, saying, I understand that you've been appointed to be part of the management team. And so I decided to come and visit the restaurant at the place that you're at the moment. And I have to tell you, it was terrible. And it just went into this thing and then saying, so I've told the people responsible and I'm querying whether you really should be joining us or not. And it was like a really serious letter. Um, so I immediately phoned the person who had appointed me, but they were on holiday. And then I can't even remember how I found this out. But anyway, it was a setup. So somebody, a colleague of mine, managed to get the headed paper and, you know, all of that stuff. So I didn't tell anybody when I found out. Um, and at my leaving do, I was presented with a lovely case of Bordeaux wines, and everybody was saying nice things. And so for my leaving speech, I said, oh, and then I got this letter from these people. And so I called them and invited us to have a discussion about it. And you could see their faces drop like this, like on tenterhooks as to what happens next. And then I said, and don't worry, it didn't happen. But it was my way of telling them, you know, I knew. And I
yeah,
think in that way, I didn't have to forgive, I suppose, because I got my own back.
exactly. You got your own back.
Yeah,
Well, one of my jobs that I had in my very early in my career, there were a group of people. We were all new, so we were all really young, and so there were a couple of them that would do. They would play pranks on you, like, and everybody was doing it. It's not like, I wasn't particularly into it, but then one of the people put a sign on my back without my knowing it that said wide load. And I was absolutely, I laughed about it and I thought, okay, I am not forgiving this. And so, and the person who did it was very ambitious. And so all of the entire group set up this ruse where he was going to get a phone call and it was going to be from one of the offices overseas that was going to offer him a job. And one of the people in the office happened to be from France and had a very heavy accent. So he was running around the office telling people that he just got a promotion to go to Switzerland. So when he found out it was what happened and that everyone in the office was in on it, it wasn't just me. Not one of my prouder moments, I will say, but at the time, it felt pretty good. And I'm sure he never forgave me, which I was okay with, actually. I didn't particularly mind that I was not forgiven for that
and
because it wasn't the first joke he had pulled on me that wasn't very nice.
yeah,
So, they always say revenge is a plate best eaten cold.
yes,
But I have to say that it was, it wasn't anything malicious. I mean, so I don't feel terribly bad about it. But I just thought there was something, he kind of needed a little bit of comeuppance. So, and he got it. So,
I love how we've moved from a topic which could be really 100% serious. You know, forgiveness is a
right.
serious thing, but and I shouldn't be surprised, knowing you as I do, that we've gone to a pretty light-hearted space. But there's also something there about how pranks are weird because on the one hand they can be great fun.
Yes,
If you go too far, they can be
that's right.
very, very dangerous, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, look, um, I, I guess it's not a good idea to make fun of a woman's weight. And I certainly wasn't by any means overweight at the time. So it was really kind of insulting. And I thought, well, you know, if you're going to play, then you have to be prepared to play the whole game and not just that. But I have to say, I've never really done anything like that since then. Um, I'm not big on those things. As you mature, obviously, you outgrow them. But but at the time, I wasn't sorry about it. So
I
that's
think
all.
that's actually a fitting time for us to start to draw this values jam to a close, actually, because if we moved on from there, then I'd want to talk to you for longer, and I know you need to attend something else. So the final question that I've got for you is, what are you encouraged to do differently about forgiveness as a result of our conversation today?
I don't think I will do anything differently. I try to be a forgiving person. I in my life, I very much believe that life is too short, and particularly with those people who are close to you, we have very limited time on Earth together. So I prefer not to dwell on wrongs or things that are unpleasant, particularly with those close to me. For things that are temporary encounters, uh, they're just that. They're temporary encounters. You can either let them live in your brain, live free in your brain, as one of my friends says, or you can evict them. So my choice is to evict them because, again, I prefer not to dwell as much as possible on the negative. I really believe in being, without sounding Pollyanna about it, but I very much believe that positivity is in the times we live in, to be positive is really your only hope for a happy life and a hope for getting through times that are difficult. If you're, it, it's not to say that you ignore danger or you ignore what's happening around you, but I think that the forgiveness allows you to move on with the rest of your life and be positive. So I don't think our discussion really has changed my view at all
Okay.
about it.
And similar to you in a way, I think I what I'm encouraged to do differently is to crank up the way that I currently deal with situations. So I think forgiveness kind of what comes before forgiveness is attribution of blame.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I don't do that. I tend, if something happens, I don't tend to say, oh, that was that person who caused this. I'm more, oh, that happened, let me deal with it, we'll move on. So um, just do more of that, I think. And you don't need to attribute blame to anybody. And if you don't attribute blame, you don't need to forgive. That might sound a bit too simplistic, which it probably is, but that's how I'm going to look at things.
I don't know if it's simplistic. I think it's pretty much, excuse me, I think it's pretty much the same feeling that I'm expressing, which
Hmm.
is that um, you choose to, it's a different way of moving past it,
Hmm.
whether you attribute blame or whether you choose not to think about it and just say, well, I'm going to chalk it up to X, Y, Z and leave it there. But I think it's pretty much the same philosophy.
Yeah.
And generally, I try not to do things I need to be forgiven for. Um, but I'm not obviously always successful. So you always hope that other people will show you the same grace that you give, but that doesn't always happen, and you need to accept it.
Yeah, and actually
You
that's a
need to
good point
accept
as
it.
well, because just because somebody doesn't forgive you, you need to have confidence in your original intention, for instance.
Mhm.
And if you've caused offense, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was your fault.
Right. Yeah.
Um, okay, so thank you so much, Leo, that you're a qualified values jammer now. And I really do thank you for this combination of, we did go fairly serious at the beginning, but then I don't know how it happened, but we somehow went somewhere quite light and playful, and I really enjoyed that part of this in particular.
Yeah. Well, as I say, we live in tough times. I think we have to try and find humor also where we can to sweeten the difficulty of the sorts of things I think we're all facing at this particular moment in time.
Well said. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A
Bye.
pleasure. Bye.